I am in touch with people around the country, around the world, who are trying to work together, not just across national boundaries, but ignoring national boundaries. Seeing that national boundaries are just one of those memes, right? National identity and protecting national interests and protecting national resources. And that's really been the source of so much conflict in the world. And it's been a bottleneck for finding solutions, because nations will protect their interests, right? But there are groups around the globe that are just bypassing those interests. They're just forming without authority. Imagine that. That is where I see cooperative evolution really taking off. That's sort of like the internet. It's viral. It doesn't respond to traditional controls or outcomes. It's going to find its own outcome. So how's this going to work at a local level? If communities are going to be responsible for more of their own decision-making processes, how's this going to work? There are examples of new community decision-making processes, such as there's something called the National Charrette Institute. A charrette is a process whereby, and I'll back up. Traditionally, if a developer, let's say, wants to get a new project through a city council, typically it would work behind the scenes. It would have all the plans worked out. It would make sure that all the votes were there. This is how it happens at the national level, at the state level. Corporations make sure that they have all the votes in hand before the vote is ever taken, right? And then the public is presented with a fait accompli. This is the decision of the governmental authority, right, to approve this project. And then the public is given a token amount of time, 15 minutes, to express its opinion about whether this is valuable or not, whether it's a good idea or not. Charrettes are a process whereby people started to see that's not enough. It's not only enough from a fairness perspective, but it's also not effective. And so a charrette is a process where all the stakeholders in a problem have share an agreement. They form an agreement, and they sign an agreement that says basically no decision will be made on this process until all of these stakeholders have had a fair and meaningful opportunity to comment and offer their own solutions to these processes. And so that's come into play in what's the new urbanism context lately, over the last decade or so. Charrettes have been done in Boulder and other communities. These are typically 3- and 4-day processes just in the initial phase. Communities, groups, stakeholders get together and they all have an opportunity to look at the plans, see what's on the table, and offer solutions to problems, spot problems. And then the developer, or whoever it is that's trying to push forward this project, has to go back to the drawing board. They've agreed up front. No final decision's been made yet until all these inputs have been received. Then they come back and they say, okay, here's how we think these problems should be addressed, here's the input we received, so forth. So at the end of the process, and then there'll be another wave, part of this charrette, a second phase, and then a third phase possibly. At the end of the process, the community sees that they had really meaningful input. They're much more willing to accept outcomes that they've had an opportunity to affect. And so the charrette process is something that I think is valuable. And there are other processes where somebody named Otto Scharmer, for example, who's affiliated with MIT, he developed something called U-theory processes, which are really opening up communities and organizations to a new way of learning, a new way of collaborating on processes, so that decisions come out of what he calls an open mind, and then an open heart, and then an open will, and then there's action that comes out of that. And that really isn't, it's a spontaneous process, it's very organic, right? So I want to look at using these kind of collaborative processes together. Because for several years I'd been trying to see how I could manage a transition for my law practice so that it would move in a different direction, be more satisfying, be less risky. I mean, we had cases that were so high risk, took so long to bring to trial that these were life-changing cases for the litigants involved and for the lawyers. So at that point in time, I saw that I just needed to act. I just needed to start the process of changing my professional career. I had no idea how it was going to work, right? But I told my law partners in Washington, D.C., I was moving in a new direction. I didn't know if it was going to work or not. It's sort of like when I moved to Boulder. I told them I was moving to Boulder. I had no idea if it was going to work or not. It turns out that it did work for 5 years or so. The oneness principles started to not just affect my personal and spiritual understanding of life, but also affected my view of how all these other forces were working in ways that were destructive, seemingly destructive for the planet, but also had a dimension that seemed to be moving towards oneness, seemed to be moving towards cooperation, towards an evolution of processes that, to me, were hopeful, even though there's no guarantees that the destructive forces could prevail. But in some ways it's clarifying, because it led me to believe that I have no other real alternative. My role in life is to try to affect change in these areas however I can.